All right, faith. Faith, that we're going to have faith. So I want to first note the difference in class size between ethics and faith. Part of it, maybe people are zoomed out. Part of it is people maybe have other things going on. Part of it is I kind of suspected that this was going to happen. People are very comfortable and interested in talking about Jewish ethics. Our congregation wants to know, what are Jewish ethics and what does Judaism have to say? Faith is difficult. It's complicated. It feels personal. I think people are not necessarily comfortable talking about it, or they think, well, I know that Judaism thinks I should believe X, and if I don't believe X, then somehow, I don't fit in here. There's a very, very, very old joke about a son says to his father, I know why Goldberg goes to synagogue. Goldberg goes to synagogue to talk to God. But you don't believe in God. So why are you going to synagogue? And the man says, I go to talk to Goldberg. So I think for a lot of people, going to synagogue is not necessarily about God, and very much about, hopefully, I think, about community and the people that are part of your community. I will say during Zoom, during the first year of COVID where we had to Zoom, I just fell into the breakout sessions. It wasn't a planned, thought out, like if we should have a worldwide pandemic and we must go on to Zoom, how would we, I thought, well, this seems like, maybe people could talk like about the Devar Torah since it's hard, since it's Zoom. And people, of course, didn't talk about the Devar Torah. They talked about each other. How are you? How are you feeling? And everybody said to me, your sermon was nice and the cantor sounded good, but I loved the breakouts. Like the hunger, right, to connect with other people. And Judaism believes very, very strongly in that. And so it is part of our communal makeup. Rabbi Frankel, and I've said this on the High Holidays, but Rabbi Frankel sometimes would introduce his sermon by saying, I'm going to talk about God. You remember him from last year. So we are going to look at texts on faith. We're going to look at the different interpretations for how people have faith or find faith or don't find faith. There's no one right or wrong way. There are multiple paths in Judaism. You can feel free to talk about your own, experience or not talk about your own experience. But I think it's interesting to see how Judaism deals with it. So the first text that we're going to look at, a foundational text, it's actually in 2 parshiot from now, the foundational text of Jewish faith. The first one is the text where God says to Abraham and to Sarah, Lech lecha, leave your land, the land that I am going to show you. And so we're going to look at that text together, and you could be thinking about, what is this, who is Abraham? What do we know about Abraham? Because this is our first introduction to him. What's missing? What doesn't the text tell us about him? And what is actually this journey all about? And then we're going to look at 3 different commentators, 2 modern and 1 medieval, to see how they interpret this journey. So give me 1 second, because, okay. I'm just going to share my screen in 1 second. I just want to get it to the right place. Okay, again, just a reminder, this is all Hartman. From the Hartman Institute, from their relatively new curriculum. So this is from the Torah portion of Lech Lecha. As I said, this week is the Shabbat of Noah, and then the next week is Lech Lecha. So we had creation, we'll have Noah, we'll have the Tower of Babel, we'll have all of those stories. And then we get to really the foundational story of the beginning of the Jewish people. And this is God's command to Abraham and also to Sarah. So God says his name at this point is still Avram. His name has not been changed. Lech lecha mi'artzecha. So go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. So let's just stop there for a minute and you can unmute yourself. Where is God? Where is God? Where is he going? Judy?
Well, back to where Nahor is from.
He's not going back. He's going forward, right? Nahor is his
Oh, from your native land. I'm
right,
sorry.
from your native land, from your native land. So
we don't know where he's going.
Right. He doesn't know where he's going, right? He doesn't know where he's going. He's told to. Now, of course, we say, well, he's going to Israel, right? But that's not what the text says. The text just says, go to the land that I will show you. So just, you know, earmark that for a moment. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I can't help but hear Debbie Friedman, you know, and you shall be a blessing. She wrote a beautiful song to the words Lech Lecha. And you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse him that curses you, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. Avram went forth as the Lord had commanded him, and Lot went with him. Avram was 75 years old when he left Haran. He took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot and all the wealth that they had amassed and the persons they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. So the reader, the omniscient reader knows where he's going, but Abraham is not told where he's going. When they arrive in the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem, the terebinth of Moreh, and the Canaanites were in their land. And Abraham appeared. So they get there, and then God says, I will assign this land to your offspring. And he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there, he moved on to the hill country east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And he built there an altar to the Lord and invoked the Lord by name. So let's just stop here for a minute. So what is this journey all about? Or what do you see from the text that it's about? What is God saying? What is God not saying? Yes, Marcia.
Well, you know, I was looking at it and thinking, what are his reasons to go? Is it fame? Is it the continuation of his family? Is it as he walks among the peoples of the earth, people won't be against him, they will be for him because then they will do well also? Or is it because he already has a relationship with God and none of the arguments matter, none of the reasons matter? I don't know.
Okay, so, I mean, these are all really important questions. Like, why is he going? Why is he going? Is he you know, when did the what's the first command, right? The first command is just to go. And then a few verses later, and all of these things will happen. Now, he may not have set out yet, but right. So the question is what makes anybody go on a journey of faith? You know, is it the things that you think you're going to get out of it? Is it, this text has a lot of mystery in it. And one of the commentators that we look at is going to focus on the mystery of the text. I'm going, I don't know where I'm going. And I'm not, and something else that I always find really interesting about this text, who goes with him on this journey?
Not his brother.
Right, not his brother.
Lot.
His wife.
His wife.
His
His nephew. Jody, I thought everybody can unmute. I think we're a small enough group, but Jody, I thought you were good.
He has no sons at this point.
He has no kids at this point. But so who else goes with him?
Well, his
What
lock,
else
stock,
goes
and
with him?
barrel. Yeah, his lock, stock, and barrel. All of his
All his
wealth.
stuff.
Possessions.
Yeah. His
All
wealth.
his possessions, of which there are a lot.
Mhm.
Think for a moment when we think about a spiritual journey, right? Somebody that is about to go on a spiritual journey in other religious traditions.
Oh,
What do they usually take with them?
Nothing.
Nothing, right?
water.
Nothing. The
That's it.
journey is alone, and certainly not with money and things and possessions. And the idea of the people that he acquired means his servants,
Sure.
right? So that's already what that says about this Jewish faith journey is really different, right? It's really different than in other traditions where the goal is to go off by yourself, whether you're up on the top of a mountain, or maybe you're with other people, but you're not talking to them, or you're praying and you're meditating and solitude, right? Solitude is part of the spiritual journey. Judaism presents something very different, that the spiritual journey is done with everything, right? With your family, if you have children, if you have servants, if you have money, it all comes with you. And, you know, but I think about, I told this story before, and, you know, Charlotte's a grown up and she probably would hate that I'm still telling this story. But when she was still in diapers, but old enough to like articulate some things, we went to Niagara Falls. And we were on Maid of the Mist. And if anybody's ever done that, it was really like so powerful to me. Like you're up close to these falls and they're so powerful, and you know, the spirituality of nature and the mist. And I'm like, and she holds up her hands to me and she says, poopy diaper. It's like, this to me is like the quintessential Jewish journey, right? Like even in the midst of your spiritual moments, somebody's tugging on you, right? That they need something. And Abraham goes on this journey and he faces war. He faces, Lot is kidnapped. He faces his shepherds and Lot's shepherds fighting. Sarah is barren. She's fighting with Hagar. Like the whole thing, like if you were to think, the promise is to go on, like if God said to you, I'm going to do all these great things for you, you would assume that you might see them in your lifetime. And Abraham sees some, but he does not live this idyllic life after he starts out on this journey. His life actually, we have no idea what his life was like before, but his life is actually quite challenging and difficult with all of the things that every other human being's life is quite difficult with, unless your family is different than mine. But with the tensions and the fighting and with great wealth, there's the herdsmen are fighting over the land, and all of these interesting issues. So to ask yourself sort of the question of, what does the Torah teach us about, you know, faith, when God tells you to go out and do this thing? So he's promised these wonderful things, but many of them are things that he's not going to see in his lifetime, like the promise of the land and the promise of all of these offspring. Yeah, Marcia?
About the one thing that God gives him that he doesn't already have is a child.
Okay, right.
Eventually.
Right.
So-
Eventually, right? Not even in, you know,
Well,
Yeah.
Right,
He doesn't know
not
that's
in
to
the
coming.
wait another parsha.
right, but it's like, as you said, in contrast to somebody going off to be alone,
Right.
he takes his life with him.
He takes his life with him. And I think about this actually, what this means as a model of faith. And really, I think that's part of the reason about that, you know, the silly joke about I go to speak to Goldberg, but there's something really, you know, one of the things, and I don't know what you all did for the high holidays, because I can't see everybody in the sanctuary at North Shore, especially in masks. But one of the things that I have some concerns about are not the people that stayed home because of their fear of COVID, or if you were protecting your health. But I had a lot of people that said to me, you know, it was really great being on our couch, you know, with our family. So first of all, I will tell you, Erev Rosh Hashanah, stay home on your couch. I loved like having an early service and then going home and having dinner. So if you want to do that one on your couch, like be my guest. But I heard a lot of people say that about Kol Nidre. Oh, it was so much easier to be on the couch. And I get it. Rushing, choking down food, worrying about traffic, and you know, like
Yeah.
I get that. I get it. But it's very frightening about what that means for community. But in the interim, I read, and because most of the people here are my age or older than me or a little bit younger than me, you may not know what this means either. I had to kind of look it up, but I know of a rabbi that's starting a synagogue in the metaverse. So what that means is you put on your goggles and your glasses And it's a fully immersive experience, right? No babies are crying. Nobody needs their diaper changed. Nobody's sneezing. Nobody's coughing on you. Nobody's getting up, and you are a fully immersive service by yourself. And I started thinking we may look back and go, oh my God, wasn't that so quaint that everybody wants to be on their couch with their family? Like, we don't know where any of this is going,
Yeah.
but Judaism's insistence that like this is a communal endeavor that we need to do together. And it flies in the face of, rugged individualism, which
Yes,
is
it
a
does.
strain that runs through. I mean, the United States had pioneers, right? And pioneers did barn raisings together. But this idea of the rugged person who sets out on their own, we don't have that in our tradition. Vera?
Well, I was thinking about that, like in our tradition all the time, we're doing things for the future. We're doing things for our children and children of our children. We constantly worry about this. And what God promised us, even if we don't believe that we get it in our time, we're going because we believe that the life of our children or next generation will be better.
Right.
Not
I
really
hate,
now,
yeah.
but
I hate to say what I'm about to say because it's really a downer. But so Abraham is promised that his children will be as numerous as the stars in the sky. I don't know if any of you have ever been at the Children's Memorial at Yad Vashem, but the Children's Memorial, you walk in, it's totally dark, and there's just the pinpricks of the light shining through like the stars in the sky. I have to say, it is an act of faith, and it's a subversive act of faith, right? To quote a Torah verse, like you are throwing this in the face of God. But if you are throwing in the face of God, you mean that you believe that there's God, right? Like this, it's this, otherwise you'd be like, I could think of other symbols you might want to put on, right? It's so painful and Jewish, and like to quote Torah, and to try to hold God to account, right? You promised that our children would be like the stars in the sky, but not like this. So, it's so, all right, but let's look at some other text. So, so to get back to the question of like, what makes any person of faith set out on any journey? And I will actually say in regards to what I just said about the Holocaust Memorial, we all know Jewish history. I'm looking, everybody on here is a parent. We all know Jewish history. We all know the many times that it did not turn out well. What made any of us decide to raise our children Jewish? As opposed to saying, you know what, this is too scary, this is too dangerous, this isn't necessary, my child will have a much better life. Listen, Madeleine Albright, right? We know people that came out of the Holocaust and said, ixnay on the, you're not Jewish anymore. But that was really rare. It was really rare. It was really the exception, not the rule. So the question, you don't have to answer this, but the thought about like knowing this could be a scary and risky endeavor. It's a journey of faith, right? To believe that I'm going to raise Jewish children. I'm going to believe that the future is going to be better. I'm going to, it might for my grandchildren, whatever. What makes, and some of it is just, maybe dumb luck and you just don't think about it that much. But so is the question, is it, you just don't think about it? It's just what we do. Is it an experience that you had? Is it a rational decision? But it is a journey it is a faith journey, even though we may not think of it that way. And so some of these texts that we're going to look at about mystery and rationalism and experience touch on, I would hope, not just Abraham's journey, but any kind of Jewish journey that any of us have taken. So yes, Barb.
I would imagine that when Abraham heard that commandment, he felt a a sense of connection to God, a sense of chosenness, and also a sense of purpose. And that is kind of what it feels like to be Jewish.
Okay, listen,
And to
I
raise
hope,
your
right?
children Jewish.
That's what I really hope, right? That's all the work. And I said to Dan recently, we threw all of our eggs in the basket of American Judaism, right? We could have moved to Israel. I didn't really want to, but we could have done other things, I mean, we really could have, because when we were young, it was something that Dan was really thinking that we should think about doing. And I thought, we threw all of our eggs into the basket of this Jewish experience, and here we are, right? Here we are. So, for sure, for me, it gives my life this sense of purpose and meaning, and it's incredibly gratifying. But whether all of my grandchildren or my great-grandchildren will be Jewish, unknown. Vera?
I think, first of all, we have hope for the better. That's my biggest, I don't even know what to call it, faith or not faith, but the hope.
Right.
And optimism. And another thing that I feel that we're very stubborn. And I know about myself and my own history, that when in Russia, they wanted me not to be Jewish, and I wanted it so much. And when I came here, instead of saying, oh, thank God, I finally don't have to be Jewish, whatever, I said, they didn't want me to be Jewish, I will be Jewish.
Right.
So this is how they're going to lose.
Right. Well, it is going to be interesting to see how the rise in anti-Semitism affects the next generation, though at the same time, it's the rise of anti-Zionism, which is, I think, corrupting the souls of our young people. So we'll see how these two things duel out. Well, it's a whole other conversation, but I am so sick of hearing like anti-Semitism on the right is worse than anti-Semitism on the left. I'm like, you know what? You want to debate between like cancer and a heart attack? Like, come on. Okay, maybe, there's really, I feel like they're both really bad. And they both have different ways of affecting us. But somebody wrote, like, unfortunately, we started out talking about school shootings, but if you saw that these, I don't know what they're called, like the Goyim League, they're the ones that are responsible for leafleting thousands and thousands of Jewish homes with anti-Semitic material, including on the North Shore. So this week they were on the highway overpass in LA, and they held up a sign, Kanye was right. If you hate Jews, honk your horn. And somebody posted on Facebook in LA, like, this is becoming like a regular day going to the office. Like, what anti-Semitic thing are you going to see? Well, okay. Let's look at some of these other texts, because every time I say I'm not going to talk about anti-Semitism, it's hard not to talk about anti-Semitism. All right. So this first text, whoops, let me get to the right place. This first text is written by a woman by the name of Aviva Zornberg. Aviva Zornberg is a current Jewish scholar. She's quite an interesting woman. She's Orthodox. Her background is that she is a professor of literature. She's from England. She's a professor of literature. And so she has taken everything that she understands about how one looks at literature and has applied it to biblical studies. And she wrote a book on Genesis, and she wrote a book on Exodus. And I've heard her. She now lives in Israel, but she used to come to the States and speak more regularly. And she's hard to read. Her writing is very full and dense. But she sheds a lot of insight into the text. So let's just look at what she has to say. Here begins the journey of Lech Lecha. For the first time, a journey is undertaken, not as an act of exile, like Adam from the Garden of Eden, Cain, who has to run away after killing his brother, the dispersed generation of the Tower of Babel. I might want to add in even the flood of Noah. So anytime anybody had to flee or leave, or was all because something bad had happened. But Avram, is a response to a divine imperative that articulates and emphasizes displacement as its crucial experience. So I just want to stop there for 1 minute. Displacement as its crucial experience in a faith journey. It is fascinating, right, that the very first person that we would, he's not really a Jew, but let's say we would identify him as the first Jew, that the first experience is leaving everything you know and setting out to go someplace else. Now, in his case, he's going to what becomes the land of Israel, which is supposed to be where the journey goes. But for all of Jewish history, this wandering Jew, this nomadic existence, and of course we know that Abraham's descendants don't end up staying in the land very long. Eventually, they all go down to Egypt, where they're there for hundreds of years. That this prototype of like the wandering journey, Moses, who travels in the desert for 40 years and never makes it to the promised land, becomes really the prototype of the Jewish journey, which is one of journeying. I've shared this before, but my daughter-in-law, when Trump was elected, my daughter-in-law was born in Israel, though raised in North America. Her grandparents, some of her grandparents were refugees from Germany who made their way to Israel. And she said to me, how would you know when it's time to go? And that was a very chilling question, because the Jews that figured out when it was time to go survived, and the Jews that didn't know when it was time to go either didn't survive or suffered very greatly. And so that question, but the prototype of being on a journey as part of your fundamental religious experience, and now we use it as a metaphor of what it means to be on a journey, but really on a physical journey. So let's just go back to more. Yes, Barb.
I think displacement means more than being on a journey. And I think it's really interesting that Zornberg is a literary scholar. What she said is absolutely fascinating. It's seeing the world from the standpoint of someone who really doesn't belong, who is an outsider. And I think that's really interesting and important.
Right. I'll tell you an interesting story, and I don't know what this really means, but I've done a tremendous amount of work with the Rabbinical Assembly as an officer, as their president, on multiple strategic plans. And the RA had this unhealthy culture of the few people that were insiders and everybody else was an outsider, and the work to try to expand this thing to make everybody feel more part of an inside. But here's the kicker. Everybody, and myself included, I was like the president, and I sometimes felt like an outsider. Like even the insiders felt like outsiders. So then there was the question about, yes, there's this culture of trying to expand so that everybody feels part of something. But I find this fundamental question in an organization whose sole purpose is to support the work of conservative rabbis. Why do the rabbis all feel like outsiders in their own organization? So part of it is the organization's doing something wrong. And part of it is, I think, this fundamental thing about what it just means to be an outsider. And Jews have never felt like more insiders than in the United States, and particularly those of us that are second or third generation have never felt more like insiders. But when Shabbat falls on Christmas, it's fantastic. We've never had more people in the building. Like people, I feel like the total insider until I'm sitting at the choral event in December and the Christmas songs that I writ. Like we all feel like insiders until we feel like outsiders. It's very interesting. And I don't, Israelis, now it's funny because Israelis feel like the consummate insiders, it's surrounded by people that tell them they don't belong there. But they're quite comfortable in their insiderness. And, that's what having your own country and your own government does for you. And when Israelis come here, they may feel like foreigners, but I don't think they feel like outsiders in the same way that we do, because they grew up in a majority culture. And it gave them a different kind of confidence about who they are, and, you know, then, well, whatever, that's okay. Yes, Marcia.
I think that it goes along with the whole structure of Judaism, because Judaism is a religion of critical thinking. And if you, the way you get that is to have distance between whatever it is, wherever you are. And if you're part of it, if you're, it's very hard to, sit up in the balcony if you're on the stage.
Yeah.
And there is such value placed on critical thinking, on making choices, on evaluating decisions, that I think it's almost built in as a requirement.
So we're going to go, when we get to the Maimonides text, which we're going to get to, because we got to get to these other texts. What you said is going to be so important to what he's trying to say to us. So let's look a little bit more at Zornberg. For what is most striking here is the indeterminacy of the journey. What is left behind, canceled out, is defined, clearly circled on the map of Avram's being, but his destination is merely the land that I will show you. From your land, the landscape of your basic self-awareness, to a place that you will know only when the light falls on it with a difference. So it's just such a beautiful writer. At what the heck she's saying, it's kind of hard to unpack, but right, like everything that you had in your old country, you knew, it's who you are, it's everything that you're familiar with, but only when you get to this new place, right, and the light falls on it and it's different, then this is all a mystery. Everything that's going to happen is a mystery. So she's quoting a midrash, espouses this view of Abraham's first trials, because the midrashim talk about this as a trial. Is there a person who travels without knowing to what destination he travels? A journey without apparent destination, absurdity at each step? The midrash gives us mocking voices that weave through Avram's consciousness as he travels. Look at this old man traveling through the country looking like a madman. Like, this is crazy, right? This is crazy. Who goes out like, oh, some of us, I had this experience myself when we started traveling after COVID. Like, I had to check my ticket 15 times and I didn't remember how to book the taxi. And when I was at the airport, how do I get everything right? We'll just book a ticket, we'll get on a plane and it's going to land. You don't even know where you're going. What should you pack for? So what Aviva Zornberg is doing by quoting this midrash is this is what Abraham is doing could be absurd, unless you look at this journey, this spiritual journey, that by definition, it's shrouded in mystery, that there's always going to be what we don't know, right? To be a person of faith means to never know God. You can never know God. You can never see God in our tradition. You can understand if the doubt about whether I think there's a God, but is there a God? Like, I remember when I was a really little girl, feeling like if God would only speak to me like he spoke to the prophets, right? That would be so, they used to think about, I don't know, I really didn't think about being a rabbi, but I used to think about those things. And of course the answer was no. Any step that you take is all shrouded in mystery. You don't know where, first of all, we never know where we're going. There's this beautiful Micha Goodman quote, but I have to look it up before I quote it because I'll get it wrong. Debbie.
My question is, what was he searching for? What made him open to this impossible journey?
We know nothing because we're told nothing about him till he starts on the journey. Everything that we learn about, this is our introduction to Abraham. We know nothing about him. So anything that we know about him, it's what happens after he's on this journey and how he acts. And sometimes he acts amazingly, and sometimes he does things that we're like, oh, I wish we hadn't done that. And we don't know, why did God choose him? Why him? So remember all that when we look at Maimonides is going to try to provide an answer. Marcia?
I'm thinking that Debbie's got something going here, because it has to fall on fertile soil.
Right.
He had to want something more to be able to respond to the call.
Right.
Right.
So let's look at Maimonides. Now, Maimonides lived 1,000 years ago. He is writing this, when we read commentary, when we read midrash, it's very often says so much more about the person that's writing it and the time the person is living in than it does about Abraham, right? But
Right.
this is going to give us, because it's
But
all
it's-
made up. Like what he's saying is it's from the Midrash. He's bringing it forward. There's nothing. How many of you remember as a kid hearing that Abraham broke his father's idols? Anybody hear that story? Abraham broke his father's idols.
Oh, I did hear that.
Anybody think that that was in the Torah? Like I thought it was in the
Yeah.
Torah. It's not in the Torah. But I thought it was in the Torah because it was told in Sunday school. Abraham broke the idols. So so why? What is that? I mean, it sounds like a silly story, but let's look at Maimonides and what he has to say about it, and then it may not seem so silly after all. So Maimonides is saying that all the people living around Abraham, the wise men among them would think there is no God other than the stars and the spheres for whose sake and in resemblance of which they had made these images, right? So the people thought, the stars were God and the mountains were God and the sun was God. And then they made idols and worshiped them, and they represented these forces in the universe that were God. The eternal rock, that's our God, was not recognized or known by anyone in the world with an exception of a few individuals. So people didn't know our God, they only knew idol worship. The world continued in this fashion until the pillar of the world, the patriarch Abraham, was born, right? So he lived in a society where nobody questioned, this pagan belief in God. After this mighty man was weaned, so this mighty man when he was 3, he began to explore and think. Though he was a child, he began to think throughout the day and night, wondering, how is it possible for the sphere to continue to revolve without having anyone control it? Who is causing it to revolve? Surely it does not cause itself to revolve. He had no teacher, nor were there anyone to inform him. Rather, he was mired in Ur-Kasdim, where he was from, among the foolish idolaters. His father, mother, and all the people around him were idol worshippers, and he would worship them. However, his heart was exploring and gaining understanding. Ultimately, he appreciated the way of truth and understood the paths of righteousness through his accurate comprehension. He realized there was one God who controlled the sphere, that he created everything. There is no other God among all the other entities. He knew that the entire world was making a mistake. What caused them to err was their service of the stars and the image, which made them lose awareness of the truth. Abraham was 40 years old when he became aware of his creator. So how, according to Maimonides, does Abraham discover the one God? What is his journey? What is Abraham's journey of faith? The opposite of mystery, right? What is Abraham's journey of faith according to Maimonides? I know it's hard to do it without seeing it in front of you. Marcia?
It's hard to think that that the sphere he's talking about is the earth, because I don't know that exactly works
Right. I mean,
for
it could be the
his
sun. it could
perspective,
be-
but okay, right, okay. Any movement of a sphere, what makes any sphere move?
Right.
Okay.
So he's saying, how did he figure this out? He studied the world around him and started asking questions. And his questions were different than everybody else's questions. Nobody could help him because they were all mired in one way of thinking. And Abraham begins to look around and say, so it takes him from the time he's a child until he's 40 years old to come to the rational. I mean, this is what Maimonides wants to put forward. It's like if you ever studied like philosophy around or theology, like the first mover, and there has to be like that. Actually, you could philosophically figure out God, and then you could have all these proofs. Now, of course, none of these proofs work for people really. But so the story of Abraham smashing the idols is not really, we think of it as a child story where most of us were told us as a child, but Abraham starts to look around and says, remember his father has an idol store, and his father leaves him in charge of the idol store. And he starts to look like, they have no power. Like somebody took a piece of wood, carved it, and said, this is an idol. But it's just a piece of wood. It has not, it can't possibly be. And so he starts in this midrash, right? And then he smashes all the idols. His father comes home, sees the inventory smashed, and says to him, you know, well, what did you like? I left you in charge. Like, what happened here? And Abraham said, oh, it wasn't me, but the big idol like hit the small idol, and they all started to fight, and they all started smashing each other. And his father says, that's impossible. They don't have the power to do that. And Abraham goes, uh-huh. Right. So we think of this as a child story, but it's really a story about where the heck did monotheism come from? How did monotheism even come? Who even thought to bring monotheism into the world? Until monotheism, it was pagan. There was the god of the sea and the god of Jupiter and there were all these gods, and sometimes they were helpful to humans, and sometimes they were not helpful to humans, and sometimes they fought with each other, and they each had power over their own realm. How did that ever end? I mean, it didn't end everywhere, right? I mean, there are places that worship multiple gods. How did this end? Somebody or some people had to look around and say, you know what? We don't believe in idols. We don't believe in them. They have no power. They don't work. And we don't actually think there's a god of the sea and the god. We think there's one God that controls everything. Some would say that's the beginning of the patriarchy, but I kind of reject that. that very, shallow thinking, but it had to happen, right? So Maimonides is saying, yes, we see in the Torah, it happened. It was Abraham. He was a logical, rational thinker. Barb.
So is Maimonides saying that Abraham came to faith through intellectual exercise?
Yes, and he believed, Maimonides believes this is the only path. It's the only legitimate path to faith is through rational thinking, which is very Jewish, right? Which is very Jewish. Nobody says this anymore, but when I was a young rabbi, people used to say to me, I feel Jewish in my heart. And Rabbi Frankel used to say we call that cardiac Judaism. It's obviously, but so rationalism, you don't have to close off your brain. As a matter of fact, you use your brain, and if you use your brain and you use all of the things that I've told the story a million times, but my husband has a cousin who's became religious as an adult, ultra religious as an adult. And we went to his son's bar mitzvah, right? Whenever, I don't know, maybe it was the Mars rover. And one of the rabbis spoke at the dinner, and the rabbi goes, Mars, Torah can take you farther than Mars. And I thought to myself, this is the most un-Jewish thing I've ever heard. Because getting to Mars, like if you believe in God, the ability for human intellect to get a Mars rover to Mars is God. Like, and not everybody believes that, and you can believe in. I'm not saying that everybody has to believe that just because, but that's one of the Jewish paths, right? That's probably the Jewish path. The downside of it is it can lead to sort of a dry lack of spirituality. Like it doesn't, it can lead to, it has unforeseen consequences, but Judaism says you can never turn off your brain. You cannot turn off your brain. That's not real faith. Vera.
But I don't understand then how it happened that in spite of all things that happened to us, which would a brain said, this is it. Okay. I think it's spirituality or faith, however you want to describe it. This is what leads the Jews to exist.
So now we're going to look at Heschel, because not everybody believes what Maimonides believes, right? I think, okay, I'll save that for the end. So we're going to look at Abraham Joshua Heschel. Abraham Joshua Heschel was a rabbi and a professor. He was born in Germany. He escaped before the Holocaust, and he came and was actually a professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary. He was in a world, the seminary was like, you know, really embraced this whole rational, the scientific study of Judaism. And he was kind of like the voice of the mystic in this very, very academic institution, which was my school. So this is sort of, and the pendulum swings, right? The pendulum swings from, you know, rationalism to spirituality. So look what he says about how somebody experiences faith. Authentic faith is more than an echo of tradition. It is a creative situation and event. For God is not always silent and man is not always blind. In every man's life, there are moments when there is a lifting of the veil of the horizon of the known, opening a sight of the eternal. Each of us has at least once in his life experienced the momentous reality of God. Each of us has once caught a glimpse of the beauty, peace, and power that flows through the souls of those who are devoted to him. But such experiences or inspirations are rare events. To some people, they are like shooting stars, passing and unremembered. In others, they kindle a light that is never quenched. The remembrance of that experience and the loyalty to the response of that moment are the forces that sustain our faith. In this sense, faith is faithfulness, loyalty to event, loyalty to our response. So in Heschel, what is it that brings people to faith? An experience. Somehow you have this experience of the divine. It might be in a moment, like a shooting star. It might be something that happens all of the time or much of the time. And then the question is I love it, the loyalty to the event. Can you hold on to that feeling? So I said there's a couple things that are fascinating about this, right? There's a couple things that are fascinating about this. The feeling that everybody and maybe not everybody does, but everybody maybe has that moment. Like maybe it's when they, you know, hand you that baby, or maybe it's, you know, when you're standing at the bima for your kid's bar mitzvah, whatever it is, right? Maybe it's you get out of the Soviet Union and you land on the shore, whatever. You have this moment, but guess what? It passes.
Yeah.
That feeling does not stay with human beings. So can you be loyal to that experience? Can you have faith that if that experience happened, it meant something and not let it fade? So we have three totally different, you know, Aviva Zornberg says, faith is a mystery. You're on this journey. It's a mystery. You don't know where you're going. You don't know where it's ending. You just go, and who knows why you go, but you go. Maimonides says, no, it's a rational exercise. You use your intellect, you look around you, you figure it out, and faith is based on your intellect and what you bring to the table. And Heschel says, no, it's an experience. You have a momentary, or if you're lucky, many momentary experiences of God, and then you remember that and you stay faithful to it even when it passes. So these are three totally different pathways. For some people, maybe that's all of them. Maybe you've had all of them at different times. Maybe you've had none of them, right? But none of them are going to say, well, Maimonides kind of says this is the way. But none of them really say, like, how do you acquire faith? You know, each of them have holes you can poke in it, right? Because you could say to Heschel, well, what if I've never had that experience? Well, then you didn't. Like, okay, so maybe that's why you don't believe in God. But I love that idea of, like, how do you hold on, if you've had it, how do you hold on to it? Vera.
No, it's Marsha.
Oh, Marcia, sorry.
What is important to me was the last phrase. If you are loyal to the experience and loyal to yourself, I think was what he said. And the idea is not only, yes, I can perceive this, but yes, I am a person who can be affected by it. And even if the sensation of the experience leaves me, I remember how I felt.
Yes, Barb.
And you want that experience to be repeated. because it enhances your existence and its meaning. I also want to make a comment about Maimonides. It seems like if rationality is the key there, then what idol worshipers were doing was just mistaking the metaphor for the real thing, like worshiping the idol instead of the creator of the sea or the other powers.
Right. And I think a tradition would also say when you're worshiping an idol, you're worshiping the work of your own hands, because you're worshiping something you created and saying that it has power. I mean, ultimate power. And so it's disloyal, it's misguided. But you know, we don't know. I mean, this is really the beginning. We just read, you know, the opening verses of Bereshit, which is all about, you know, one God created everything. So we take that somewhat for granted because we live in Western culture where pretty much everybody believes that now. But that was such a radical break from everything that came before it. Like the Torah is such a radical break. And it's, you know, it's hard to remember that now because it's thousands of years old and it's what we grew up with, and Christians believe it and Muslims believe it. And we don't come in contact with many people who, you know, don't believe these things, or they don't believe them, but they don't believe, they're not pagan. So it's hard to really, like, we have to really remind ourselves what a radical break this was with everything that the rest of the world, you know, what the rest of the world believed, until Judaism came and said, no, one God. So anybody else? Yes, Judy.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the quote we read in our Haggadah. I'm assuming it's in everyone's Haggadahs. You know, I believe in the sun even when it's not shining, and I believe in love, or whatever. And I mean, so there's the experience of the sun and of love, but there's the intellectual knowledge of it. Kind of encompasses so much of what we just talked about. Is that a Maimonides quote too?
No, I actually think that's a Holocaust quote.
It was the whole, I thought they were like, in our Haggadah, they have that, and then they have like another quote.
Well, because we also have Anima Amin, right, which we sing on thy holidays,
Right,
I believe. So they might
yeah.
put that to, right. So it could be taken
Oh,
off from that
yes.
Anima Amin, I believe. Even the Messiah, even though the Messiah tarries, I still believe.
Yeah.
You know, I think it was Vera who said hope, right? Whether it's, you know, hope, you know, hope that the future will be better, hope that Judaism will, I mean, hope that Judaism will continue. All of that is actually an act of faith that all of us have taken in some way, or we wouldn't be on this journey together. We wouldn't be here together. And so, all right. Yes, Vera.
But I just want to add that for us, there is no hope if there is no Israel.
Listen, you know, I think
That's
things
my-
things are going to
that's my-
get tougher because the Israeli elections are not looking like they're going to go in a way that's going to be happy for people that still believe in democracy. So it's good. It could be tough. But I told people on Shabbat, I'm very involved with an organization called Zionist, which is a very progressive, politically progressive, when it's on the American agenda, politically progressive and proudly Zionist is probably, I think, their tagline. And she said, well, the work isn't over just because we don't like the government, right? Israel is a legitimate state with a bad government. There are lots of legitimate states with bad governments, probably more legitimate states with bad governments than legitimate states with good governments. And so however bad the government has nothing to do with whether the state of Israel has the right to exist or be legitimate. And so the fight is still the same fight. And I that was helpful for me to hear that, because I'm a little overly obsessed with our midterm elections here. So I haven't focused so much on Israel, but I'm expecting this is going to be a rough month. So we'll continue to study faith together. All right, everyone, have a lovely day. So I will tell you, the Wednesday night class is going to be the identical class. So for any reason you have to miss on a Tuesday and you want to join on a Wednesday, feel free. The classes will be posted on the website. So if you miss something and you just want to watch it in your own spare time, also feel free. And otherwise, I'll see you all next week.
Thanks.
Long
Thank you.
live Hartman Institute.
Yeah,
We
listen,
have
there,
very
oh,
good things
oh,
over
I
there.
should do a public service announcement. Hartman has opened it's not a branch because it's not a physical building, but Hartman has a person here now in Chicago. And they are going to be offering programs and adult education in Chicago. When they're totally up and running, I will share all of this with you, but it's a really exciting, also Hadar, which is another amazing educational institute, has a person now on the ground, and Mazone, which is an organization to fight hunger, now has a Chicago person. So we were the flyover for my whole career, and now 3 really important Jewish organizations have realized that actually there's really an important community between the Hudson and the Pacific
Right.
Ocean, and we now are going to have all of these resources in Chicago that we've never had. So stay tuned. It's very exciting.
That's good.
You see, I mean, where is hope? There is a,
That's right. These organizations are growing. It's fantastic, bringing Jewish education. So, all right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank